So far in our video we've been focused on the simple beginnings of a home building, the excavation, the foundation work, and the framing in the basement. But I want you to understand this video was not intended to be a how-to video, how to build a home. There's plenty of information on the internet and in books to help you out with that process. What this video is really about is why to build a home, why to get your adolescent involved in the project. And the biggest reason why I'm getting Braden involved as part of this project, and it's one of the driving forces as to why I'm building this home, is for character building. I believe that in today's society and culture, character building is the most important and primary focus that we should all be concerned about. Instead, we're focused mostly on freedom of choice. How can the Bill of Rights and the Constitution give me freedom of choice and more choices? Because it should all be my decision as to what's right and what's wrong, and it should be my decision as to what I do with my future so that I can reach my dreams. So why is character development so important at this point in our culture and society? I believe it's because we have far more temptations and vices available to us today than ever before in the history of mankind. We promote freedom of choice more and more so, as if that was our number one priority. I think that's a dangerous place. I think we're headed toward destruction because of our focus on freedom of choice and our focus on providing more choices, more opportunities for temptation. Mr. Fode established this quote back in the late 1800s. You cannot dream yourself a character, you must hammer and forge one. You don't hear that quote very often, but if you think about it, I start to question, why did Mr. Fode come up with this quote back in the late 1800s? And there was hardly any suggestive materials. There was no TV, there was no internet, there was no colored newspapers. But yet he was brilliant enough to realize that it was more about character development and focusing on who your inner person was rather than having freedom of choice, establishing more and more choices. Whereas today, we don't even recognize the quote or think about the character development and how many unlimited choices that we are having dangled in front of us on a daily basis, tempting us to take the wrong path. But yet, character development has been placed on the back burner. I understand freedom of choice is a sensitive subject. Many people believe that the difference between right and wrong is a freedom of choice. It's more about what you believe and how you're feeling more so than a black and white handbook that tells you what's right and wrong. I disagree with this philosophy. In fact, this philosophy is called relativism. And it's based on the fact that what is your neighbor doing? If he's strayed off the beaten path and doing non-virtuous activity, and enough of the neighbors are doing that non-virtuous activity, then relativity says that it's probably okay if I jump on the bandwagon because everybody else is doing it. But if you went back to some sort of handbook, wouldn't it be great if we had a handbook that would tell us what's morally correct? Unfortunately, we took the Bible out of the classroom back in the 60s. Now the Bible, whether you're religious or non-religious, we're not going to talk religion here. I don't care what denomination you are, if you are religious. But you must agree that the Bible has a lot of good content when it comes to establishing what's right and what's wrong. It's got the 10 Commandments. That's basically the source of all of our virtues, and establish what is right and wrong. If we didn't have a Bible, a handbook that tells us what's right and wrong, how would we even have a baseline? It would just be chaos. It would be nuts. Nobody would even know what the terms right and wrong meant. So as we took the Bible out of the classroom because we didn't want to talk about God. We didn't want to take away people's freedom of choice, that they feel like they were being forced or uncomfortable talking about and learning about religion. But then we didn't replace it with a handbook on virtue and what's right and wrong. We did not replace it with a sterile handbook that takes away the religious content, but still describes what is right and wrong. For the last 40, 50 years, we've been freewheeling it and just decided, well, it's all relative as what's right and wrong. It's really just your choice. You can decide what's right and wrong. Now, the dangers with not having the handbook, not having a black and white book of code to describe what's right and wrong is we relatively drift over time because we don't have a baseline. Naturally, every kid challenges their parent. When their parent says you can't do that, that's wrong, that's non-virtuous, you're going to say, oh, but maybe if I just do it a little bit, maybe if I just do it this one time, it'll be okay. So you go ahead and do it, and you challenge your parents, and you probably get away with it. And over time, you continue to do that, and you test that book of code, that ethical code book, and eventually that's who you become. So there's a little bit of drift there from the baseline of what your parents or grandparents did. And now when you have kids, your kids are going to challenge you on the same topics, but you've already drifted just a little bit, a little delta. You're mathematical. There's been a little bit of delta shift in the moral ethical code. And now when you have kids, they're going to try to stretch that code a little bit more. So eventually you got all these little deltas over time, and as with each passing generation, the moral ethical code degrades with each little bit of delta change with each passing generation. And if you don't have a handbook to base it on, if something defined black and white, then nobody knows any different because it's all relative. It's what you choose. So, you're probably thinking, why did you get on your soapbox? How does this have anything to do with home building? And it has a lot to do with home building. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be building a home that you get your kids involved with in order to develop character. It's just that in today's society, we're losing more and more opportunities to build character in our children because we're becoming much more of an electronic world where kids are just placed down in the living room, in their bedrooms, where they can either play on their video games or their computer or their cell phones. And as a student, it's called learning, and as an adult, it's called working. And we can't really distinguish between working, playtime, learning, when all we're doing is staring at a computer or a cell phone. I can't establish the difference. If somebody's standing there and I'm trying to have a conversation with them and they're staring at their cell phone, are they playing a game? Are they chatting with their friends? Are they working? Are they learning? I don't know. When you see somebody building a home, swinging a hammer, driving a nail, there's no question what he's doing. He's working. He may be learning, which is fine as a side note, but he's not playing. He's actually creating work. The classical sense of work is force times distance equals work. He's actually using a force with a hammer to drive a nail. The nail moves a certain distance. Force times distance is actually what creates work. And real classical work is what establishes work ethic. Okay, so the obvious character building trait that you would see or expect with home building would be establishing a work ethic, because it is hard work, but there's more to it than that. It's about taking on a large commitment and following through. It's about giving up some of your daily freedoms in a world in which we are totally obsessed and focused on freedom of choice. Because establishing character is going to require giving up some of your freedoms. It's about something bigger. It's committing to a project, in this particular case, a project with your parents and seeing it through to completion. And it's just not a little simple construction paper and glue project. This is something big that's going to take a year. So it's a big commitment, and you can't just drop the ball midway through. So it's about respecting your parents' choice to begin this project together. It's not something you probably wanted to do as a teenager, but you have to respect your parent because it's important to them. And that comes from the 10 Commandments, honor your father and mother. That's a big one. So your adolescent child's going to jump on board not exactly knowing what they're going to be getting into, but they didn't have a choice. And they shouldn't have a choice because they are your child. It's your responsibility to parent them, and it's your responsibility to teach them the difference between right and wrong, teach them character building, teach them that it's not all about freedom of choice. Sometimes it's about the bigger picture. Sometimes it's about doing something hard for other people. So you might be thinking, why would I build a house for myself? People just don't do that anymore. They hire contractors. That's a lot of hard manual work, and that's something that my great-grandparents would do, but they were rugged pioneers, and I'm not. Well, I believe that in order to bring back some of the good virtues from the good old days, we have to reinvent the good old days, bring back processes, work ethic, and belief systems from the good old days rather than trying to establish a new moral code based on freedom of choice.